Welcome back to another episode of Opal Wave MTG, a channel dedicated to exploring power levels in EDH and helping you tune your deck to your meta. I am Jacob, and today we're going to be talking about downgrading your EDH deck. And generally, most of the time as EDH players, we're just thinking about making upgrades to our decks without really thinking about the arms race that's being created within your own playgroup. So if you're having issues matching power levels with other players and you're trying to figure out how to lower the power level of your deck, I hope that this video gives you some good insight in how to do that. With the release of the new Dominaria set, there is a lot of really cool stuff that's being released. So if you're interested in seeing any of those decks or commanders being brewed for in the format that I do, please let me know. And with that, let's go ahead and get started. The first point I wanted to talk about was card advantage, and card advantage is one of the most powerful mechanics that anyone can have access to in Magic the Gathering. The more cards you have access to, the more responses you can have for your opponents, and just the more stuff you can do in general. And there's a few different ways we can actually gain or lose card advantage outside of just drawing cards. So an example of that would be something like a disenchant versus a Heliod's Intervention. As Disenchant can only destroy one artifact or enchantment, Heliod's Intervention can potentially destroy multiple artifacts and enchantments. And because of that, you are using your one card to destroy multiple artifacts and enchantments. And because of this, you are gaining card advantage because your one card you only needed one card to deal with a bunch of cards that are being put on the table. Or something like a Genesis Wave that can just put out a bunch of cards at one time would be another example of card advantage that doesn't necessarily mean that you draw cards. So if you want to reduce the power level of your deck, thinking about what forms of card advantage your deck is using is a great way to evaluate that. So one thing we can check out is something like a Necropotence, which is a very powerful card advantage tool, as well as a way to get card selection in general. So if you're using this and this card is just coming off as way too powerful every time you're using it, maybe consider switching to something like a Phyrexian Arena, which is only going to let you draw one card at the beginning of your upkeep. Or if you've got like an Adnaz, which is generally just winning you the game when you resolve it, so, something like a Sign in Blood might be a decent replacement because it's only going to draw you the two cards. If you've got a commander with a very powerful card advantage effect in its ability, a good way to reduce that in terms of card advantage would be to reduce the synergy. Generally, when you think about Tatyova, you think about making multiple land drops in a turn, and just a bunch of lands in general. All these cards are just going to synergize with your deck really well and make it really hard for players to deal with Tatyova. Just because if you're ramping that hard and they remove Tatyova, you can just recast Tatyova and keep on with your game plan, which makes your opponent's removal more or less obsolete, and that can be pretty frustrating. So if you're running a card like that with a lot of inherent card advantage built into it, think about reducing overall synergy in your deck. Another way we can reduce the power level if we have in terms of card advantage is think about how many resources you need to invest in order to actually get the card advantage. So again, if we look at Tatyova, once you resolve Tatyova, you don't really need to do anything else except for just to keep playing your deck. If we're thinking about Kefnet, we actually need to invest 4 mana to draw that card. So again, we're using more resources to gain that card advantage than we would if we're using Tatyova. Another great way we can reduce that power level is to, how much do you actually, again, if we need more resources in order to get something to go off, and then how much payoff are you getting for investing those resources? So if we've got a Biden of Thassa, something like maybe an Edric deck where you got a bunch of small dudes that can swing, that's going to be a lot of card advantage. And if you want to slow that down, maybe go down to like a Military Intelligence where you're not going to be drawing a bunch of cards per combat. You're just going to be drawing the additional card because of the Military Intelligence, or even something like a Rhystic Study potentially in terms of like how many resources you need to invest to get that card advantage. Rhystic Study, again, like the Tatyova, you kind of just put it down and you don't even need to do anything at that point. Your opponents just need to play the game, and eventually they'll either conspire against you to not let you draw that card, or they are not going to have the mana, and they're going to need to make certain plays, and then you get to draw the cards. So consider all these factors when you're thinking about how much card advantage your deck can generate. The next point I want to talk about is efficient combos. So a great way to lower the power level of your deck is to reduce the efficiency of your combos, increase the amount of cards that are needed to actually execute said combos, and create more windows of opportunity for your opponents to interact. So something like Thassa's Oracle plus Tainted Pact is a very compact combo that is hard to interact with outside of straight up counter magic. And that's primarily because once Thassa's Oracle resolves, you can cast your Tainted Pact, and it doesn't matter if Thassa's Oracle's on the field anymore, because if you have 0 cards in your deck, you're going to win the game regardless, right? So another really compact combo is something like cEDH plus Felidar, or any number of the creatures that untap cEDH. If you want to still run your cEDH combo, but you want to power it down, consider increasing the number of cards and resources that you need in order to actually get that off. And a way we can do that is, for example, something like this, where we have Aggravated Assault plus Goblin Marshal plus Skirk Prospector plus cEDH. And if the first thing you're going to notice is that we need way more cards in order to execute this combo. And the second thing you're going to notice is how many resources we are investing in order to get this combo off. So we got to cast the 6 mana Goblin, we got the Aggravated Assault, which is 3 mana plus the extra 5 to actually have it activate. We've got a caster Kiki, and then we need a Skirk Prospector in play. So essentially how this combo works is you're going to make a copy of your Goblin Marshal, which is going to make another Goblin Marshal plus 2 more 1/1s. You use your Skirk Prospector to sacrifice all 3 of those tokens. The Goblin Marshal will make an additional 2 more goblins, and then you can sacrifice you sacrifice the extra 2 goblins, and then you have 5 mana, so you can activate your Aggravated Assault, which will untap your cEDH, and from there you can create infinite combat steps. And from there, you actually do need another piece in order to actually win, even from this, because it's only going to give you extra combat. So if you don't have something that can swing or be evasive and get around any of the blockers that your opponents have, in addition to that, there's more points of interaction for your opponents. They can destroy the Aggravated Assault, they can destroy the Goblin Marshal in response to the cEDH activation. Lots of different interactions, more resources needed, a lot of different factors. Another thing we can do is reduce redundancy, and there's a few different ways we can do that. So again, if we're going to keep thinking about the cEDH combo, if you're in a 3 or even 4 color deck that's trying to just get a cEDH combo off, the more of the untapper or cards that combo with the cEDH is going to obviously make it more efficient. It's going to make it more reliable, because every time you find that cEDH, the odds are you'll probably have a piece that actually combos with it. So reducing the redundancy, maybe going down to just 1 or 2 cards that combo with Kiki instead of 4 or 5 or even 6 sometimes that can combo with Kiki, can definitely reduce that redundancy and make the deck weaker. And again, obviously something like a Dominating Vampire is going to be less consistent than a Deceiver Exarch, which is something that I mentioned in my Edgar Markov video. Another way we can reduce redundancy is by reducing the amount of tutors, and tutors are extremely powerful in EDH, helping you get your game plan off more consistently, but at the same time, with that consistency is going to increase the power level. So if you want to decrease the power level of your deck, make it less consistent, reducing the amount of tutors in your deck is going to be a great way to manage your deck's power level. And the next thing I wanted to talk about is increasing mana cost. So if you've been watching my channel for a while now, you'll see that as I am moving up in the power level spectrum, I am decreasing the cost of my spells. So for example, we're going to take Counterspell, a Cancel, and a Force of Will. Counterspell being 2 mana, Cancel being 3 mana, and a Force of Will being free. So there is more opportunity for your opponents to interact and actually get their game plan off if you are running Cancel than there is a Force of Will, because if I have a Force of Will, I can tap out and advance my game plan and still have a response to someone else, even though the only cost I have to pay obviously is the 1 life and discarding a card, but being able to advance my game plan and be able to take more actions within a given amount of time is extremely powerful. So increasing the costs will definitely make for more opportunities for your opponents to advance their game plan, create more dynamic situations where you have to make harder choices about whether or not you're going to advance your own game plan or you're going to hold up, interaction essentially. So yeah, increasing costs is going to definitely help and have a huge impact on whether or not your deck is being powered up or powered down. One more thing I would like to talk about here is impact. So if we're going to think about impact, maybe we'll take mono green elves here for a second. Something like an Elvish Mystic is going to have much higher impact turn 1 than something like a Defiant Elf in the context of a deck that really wants to get a bunch of mana dorks out as soon as possible and use the extra mana, the overwhelming mana, to overrun your opponents essentially. So if we're going to think about how much impact our cards have, something like Elvish Archers or Defiant Elf early game is not going to have near as much of an impact as an Elvish Mystic into Elvish Archdruid, for example. Another thing we can do is, instead of running cards like Craterhoof Behemoth or even Enraged Forerunners, which have a very high chance of just straight up ending the game when they resolve, something like a Gladeheart Cavalry, while it has a very similar casting cost, will have nowhere near as much of an impact when it resolves. So considering how much impact any given card has into your overall strategy is a great way to power down your deck. And the last thing I wanted to talk about here is reducing synergy. And for example, if we take Marath being my favorite commander in Magic, Marath has a lot of different abilities. You can either put counters on things, you can deal damage to things, or you can make tokens. So cards like Parallel Lives and Hardened Scales are going to synergize with Marath really well and increase the power level of your deck. So if we want to think about reducing our Marath deck's power level, instead of having cards that are synergized with Marath, we can instead think about a theme and then start playing towards the theme of the deck instead of the cards that synergize. So for example, we can start running more cards that just create tokens, and these cards aren't necessarily going to be synergizing with Marath just because all they do is make tokens. And even though Marath can make tokens on its own, something like synergy would be more like Parallel Lives with a Symbol of Allegiance, since Parallel Lives would double the amount of tokens you make with a Symbol of Allegiance. But if all we're doing is making tokens, then the theme of the deck will help reduce the power level instead of using synergy in that context. And that's all going to be all for this episode of Opal Wave MTG. I hope you gained some insight on how to power down your deck and better fit into your playgroup. And until next time.